over live. That's live. Turn your volume up. If you're recording now, or
I'm recording, starting right now. Sure. Let me make sure. I'll tell you what. The thing that has happened to me on multiple podcasts, I have to make sure that I have a licensed copy of the software. There we go. Because I'm constantly resetting the software, and therefore it flips back into trial state.
Right.
And 10 minutes in, suddenly I'm overlaying noise on my own recording. So.
The maker of Rogue Amoeba or Audio Hijack, not sending good audio is kind of ironic, I guess, and not
using unlicensed versions of his own software.
You should talk to somebody about that. I'm sure they could.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kyle just tweeted out for me, I think. Just gonna do a quick bit of retweeting. Yeah, the Ecamm Live thing, the stream software, what they're doing is kind of crazy because you can stream out to restream.io. If you've seen that company, they basically, instead of just streaming to Twitch or just to Periscope,
right,
you go to Restream and then they broadcast it out,
pass it to 4 different channels.
Exactly, yeah. But then on top of that, so that was cool that they hooked up with them. Before you had to do it custom, but now it's built into the software. But on top of that, they also somehow go out and, not somehow, I mean but they go out and grab the chat conversations from every other stream. So like I'm going right now to Twitch is our main one, Periscope and YouTube just for fun, and then I threw on Microsoft's Mixer just because why not? It's another button to hit, and it's connected.
Sure.
But then all the chat room stuff comes to me in a little window that I can throw onto the screen.
And can you respond and it knows where to send the response to?
Not in Ecamm. So that's where I have to go back to Restream's chat, whatever browser chat thing for all of it. But then it will go out back to all the other services right away. So I can, in one spot, I can see and respond if I wanted to. If I was actually, I don't usually do that because I can't multitask at that level. But
right.
But yeah, so it's pretty slick what they're doing. I don't know how. I assume somebody along the point, when one of those services gets so popular enough, they're going to just lock down their API or whatever, so that services can't just group them together like that. But for now, knock on wood or whatever this desk is made of. Okay, so the conversation that you and I are going to have is going to edit it into the show after the fact. So I'll skip all the intro music and all that stuff and sort of jump right in.
But I even brought my own. I brought some intro music for myself. I got.
Well, there you go.
No, So I think you've seen Farrago, right? Our soundboard app.
Yeah.
So I in the past, I guess it came out about 7 or 8 months ago. I've done a few podcasts for it, and I have obviously had to fiddle with it and use it in practice, which I don't generally tend to do. But I at least leave it hooked up so that it's possible I can drop in something if I need to.
Yeah. Well,
I use a light touch. I'm not actually planning to do this, but
oh no, it's okay.
It's available if we need it.
That's almost like that's going to be a pre podcast interview questionnaire now. As more people use stuff like Farrago with Audio Hijack, is are you going to be blasting me with sound effects while we talk, or is this going to be a sound effects free podcast? And that's what actually my testing. Well, actually, I should just test to make sure mine's going, but. Actually, I don't think I have it. So here we go. I don't have it routed to you.
Right. Okay.
I have it
routed. So if you just heard it, I can hear it.
Yeah, I can play sound effects while you're talking. You won't know that I'm doing it. For comedic effect,
that's even worse.
Yeah.
I guess I could do that too. Yeah, I could route it just to. Yeah. Okay.
I'd find it afterwards on the audio, I guess.
Then you get a recording full of terrible sound effects that you didn't even know were there.
Yeah, exactly. So no, Farrago has been great. I was testing using it to as I'm checking, make sure audio routing is going everywhere I need it to go or whatever, and then I was wondering how often you hear that, like the funky loop one or the slow jam loop, like the presets that you guys included, Loopback or whatever, for testing. You must be sick of the slide whistle and the
right. Exactly. I usually have a secondary sound set up. I reset this yesterday, the day before, so I don't even have my secondary sound. So all I've got are the default sounds on here. So I've definitely heard these all a million times. We actually during when we were making the software, we had a totally different set of test sounds. So it was all copyright infringing, so we obviously couldn't ship it. But had sound clips from various movies and whatnot.
Yeah, I was actually in the beta. I don't know if that I can remember. I remember there was a Merlin Mann one in there or something, but I know.
Yeah, that's right. That's
other
right.
random stuff that was in there that then all of a sudden, when the full version came out, changed to
totally different because obviously we can't ship. Some of that we might have been able to ship, but some of it was definitely like stuff from Pixar movies and whatnot, which I don't want to get.
Yeah, you don't know. Definitely don't want to get their attention in an audio app. That's for sure. So, Paul, you're perhaps a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but best known for your YouTube video, Here Comes the Pizza Affair. You've got 1.7. I was doing a little Google search, and I was like, I know you from Mac software stuff, but then I was like, oh, he has a YouTube channel. I wonder if there's any, Rogue Amoeba stuff. I was like, Here Comes the Pizza is the top view.
No, there's one video, I think, right?
Yeah.
The channel exists expressly to copyright infringing, rehost a video from a Red Sox broadcast 9 years ago. I forget what year it is, 2009, 2008. 2008, I think. Ago. Just look up Here Comes the Pizza and you can get the whole story. But yeah, that is probably the single thing that I have posted that has gotten the most eyeballs, at least.
Yeah.
Because I think it's got about 2 million views, and it recently a friend stumbled on it and got back to me that it was in a tournament for the best moment in sports, like best weirdest, dumbest moment in sports, and I don't know, I haven't checked the progress, but it was the #1 seed. So this is a story that people, I don't know, we can tell it if we want, but I think it's better if people just go check it out.
Yeah, because it's a good visual story and worth checking. It's a baseball story, but it doesn't really, you don't have to love baseball even to, and I'll put a link in the show notes to it.
Doesn't really have anything to do with baseball.
No. There's a baseball in the story, but that's it. And it happens at a baseball stadium. But
briefly, yeah.
But yeah, more importantly, I guess for the purposes of this podcast, which is not a YouTube channel review podcast, but you started Rogue Amoeba back in 2002, and shortly thereafter, Audio Hijack was released. Do I have that sort of timeline as far as the...
Yeah, so actually, Audio Hijack existed prior to Rogue Amoeba. Myself and my two co-founders, Alex and Quentin, we started the company at the end of September in 2002, about 16 years ago. But prior to that, we'd been working together on a couple different MP3 players, software MP3 players, MacAmp, which was one of the first MP3 players, and then some tangential software based on that or related to that. And one of those apps had a plugin system that let us do things like plug in an equalizer or other audio effects. And Alex made a plugin called Audio Hijack, which let you capture audio. And at the time, the idea was to pull audio in and then apply our audio effects to it. So it was, here's a sentence you won't hear too often. People were listening to real audio streams, and they wanted to apply an equalizer to them. And so Audio Hijack let you bring that audio and adjust it and make it sound a little bit less awful. I won't even say better, but less awful. And eventually that morphed into a way to record audio that you couldn't get on its own otherwise. And eventually that spawned Audio Hijack, which as a standalone application. And the company we were working with at the time wasn't interested in it. So we said, well, we think this has some potential, and spun out our company. And that's sort of the origin of Audio Hijack 16 years ago, which is still to this day our what I call our flagship product, certainly our most famous product.
Yeah, it's definitely I remember the real audio days. I'm old enough with computers to remember those days. I was on the Windows platform back then, and so I wasn't aware of anything happening in the Mac world that of interest, I guess. But yeah, I remember those days and the sort of audio nerdery stuff that was going on and hacking things and trying to like figure out this new internet age, I guess, of streaming audio and stuff. So, and when was this your first sort of entry? Was software your entry into Mac stuff, or audio your entry into it, or where's your sort of passion in it, if you were to pick a team, I guess?
Well, so people always think we're an audio focused shop or that we a whole bunch of audio engineers or anything like that. And really it's something we sort of stumbled into. Like I said, at the time, early 2000s, and even back to like 99, we were working on various MP3 applications because that was sort of up and coming. And that was interesting. It was enjoyable, and it was a way to listen to music that wasn't possible just a year or two earlier than that. But we made this tool, Audio Hijack, and it was pretty popular. And people used it. People had different uses of it, use cases for it than we expected, and that was great. but we never said, all right, let's make an audio software company. We said we want to release this application, and it turned out to be pretty popular, so we kept developing it. And about 6, we released the first Audio Hijack. We had a new version that, well, so I made sure that one of my applications was, there we go, unlocked. I left another one in trial state. There we go. Sorry about that. It just popped up a warning that it was going to start overlaying noise.
That's awesome.
So we had Audio Hijack in the end of 2002, and we were working on the new version, and we realized we had really what was a new product, and that became Audio Hijack Pro, which was the main product for about 10 years. And from there to sort of, I feel like I'm rambling, to sort of down. Basically, people said, oh, I want to edit audio, or oh, I want to broadcast audio, or oh, I want to stream audio to my Airport Express, which doesn't even exist anymore. And it was something where we had a tool that was focused on audio, and people came to us with related needs. And very quickly we said, okay, we can make a tool that does that. Broadcast was a fairly similar one. It uses the same audio capture engine that Audio Hijack does, but then sent it out to Nicecast servers and Shoutcast servers. And editing needed some new technology, but still worked with MP3 files and AAC files that we were recording with Audio Hijack. And so something where, if you're going to make, I'm trying to, an example, if you make a toaster, you might also get asked to make a toaster oven and a microwave, and suddenly you have a line of kitchen appliances, even though you were focused on making a toaster.
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably most companies do say, let's make kitchen appliances. We did not say, let's make audio software. We said, we have a software product we want to make, and it turned out to be an audio product that turned out to be pretty popular.
Yeah, because that's my entrance into the even Rogue Amoeba world or whatever, I think was probably you on whatever, maybe a Daring Fireball podcast, or John Gerber referencing you in a post from his blog or whatever, way back when I'm talking, and then kind of stumbling into the audio stuff that you guys do and sort of recognizing you as a Mac developer of some repute, I guess, in the community before I even needed your software, I guess, at the time. And so, but yeah, it's kind of neat to sort of, I guess, stumble along that way, I guess, figuring out new opportunities, new pieces of software that you could use, and kind of, I would guess, listening to a lot of user feedback from apps that you have, and then sort of like splitting them off, because you have quite a few. So if somebody's not familiar in the podcasting world, by the way, on Twitch, I know folks are asking what my name is, because I have your name up. My name is Chris. His name is Paul. We're not Mike and Keith. The Rogue Amoeba has a number of audio-focused apps now, and we won't cover all of them in the discussion here, but suffice to say, if you check out Rogue Amoeba, R-O-G-U-E, Amoeba, A-M-O-E-B-A.com, there's an app called Airfoil, which allows you to kind of, it's like what Apple wants. Airplay? Is it that? That's what it's called, right?
Airplay, yeah.
Yeah, wants it to be.
Airplay 2 now. Yeah, it was AirTunes, that was Airplay, now it's Airplay 2.
Yeah, so for getting audio everywhere in your house or apartment or condo or whatever, or workplace, from your Mac and sending it all around. Audio Hijack is one we'll talk about a lot, where you're recording audio and EQing it and grabbing it from apps that don't otherwise allow you to record audio, and sending it to apps that don't otherwise allow you to input audio from within the Mac. And Farrago is the soundboard app. That's what we use here at Good Stuff. I use a lot, and so any sort of like slide whistle or whatever sound effect that you need to add. There we go.
I gave you one. That's it. That's probably all of it.
And then Fission is an audio editing app, and we'll cover that a bit. And Loopback is also another really powerful audio app for the Mac that fills a gaping hole that Apple kind of leaves for developers, I guess, to fill in or whatever. But it's the one we'll cover as well and talk about a bit. And then also Piezo. Piezo? Am I saying that right?
Yeah. It's not entirely clear how it should be pronounced. I go with Piezo.
That's awesome.
But because like there's multiple pronunciations of most of our names, and so I want to chime in just the tiny pitch that I'll do. We also own MacAudio.com, which is much easier to spell. So if you're looking to get to our website, Google has been the savior, because there's 4 different ways to spell amoeba, and no one knows how to spell the word rogue properly. Yeah. But MacAudio.com we acquired a year or 2 ago, and that's much easier. And once we I said earlier we didn't set out to be a Mac audio company, but once we realized that we were a Mac audio company, we scooped up MacAudio.com .com
Yeah.
became available.
Nice. That's yeah. It's the having a company name before the internet age sort of took over, I guess. Right? Is the
I mean, yeah, 2002, like we were able to, we knew we needed a proper domain, and we were able to get a .com domain at the time. So that was part of it. We wanted to be able to have a proper .com domain, not a .co or a .biz or whatever. I don't even know what existed at the time. Not much, but
yeah.
Looking back on it, I wish we'd chosen something that was easier to spell.
So we'll get into the apps. I mean, we'll just go alphabetical almost maybe from, and this will be a little bit of like preference given to what I actually use, just because what I know. But Audio Hijack is by far the one I use the most. I'm using it right now to record what we're saying. There's other apps that record for you and will, like the Ecamm Live, the streaming software I use, makes a recording of what we're doing right now, but it doesn't give you the control of being able to add things like you referenced earlier, like dynamics processor or EQ or level meters, volume control, all that kind of stuff. And so I think of it as like sort of like audio utility knife almost, or something for the Mac, where it just allows you to, if you're an audio nerd at all and do anything audio wise on your Mac, podcaster, voiceover artist, anything like that, it kind of just like a thing you need to have in your toolbox almost. Is there use cases that, I guess, like I'm a podcaster, and so that's sort of where I use it, but what other use cases that you've come across for something like Audio Hijack? Where are people using it?
So the biggest, at this point in 2018, the biggest use case is probably podcast. The single biggest use case is probably podcasting. And, hopefully anytime anyone says, hey, I want to record a podcast, people say, oh, check out Audio Hijack. That's certainly what we hope for. And we've certainly developed a lot of the tools within the application to assist podcasters. But when it started, it was, as I mentioned, it was getting real audio into an MP3 format so you could put it on your. This is before an iPhone, and this is when real audio streaming was still a thing. And within for the next couple years after that, Windows Media Streaming was also a thing that was you could only listen to when you had an internet connection and when you were at a device that could play Windows Media. So again, if you wanted to put audio on your iPod, you couldn't do it without making a recording with Audio Hijack. So that was early on, the first couple of years, that was a big use case, was pulling audio streams from the internet and basically creating standalone files that you could then control, play in iTunes, play in your iPod, whatever. That's definitely still a decently big use case. There is a lot of stuff streamed on the internet that is not available as a podcast. Plenty of things are available as podcast, and if you've got a podcast reader, you can just listen to them that way. But there are many things that are still live streamed or not available in the format that you might want. So that's a big use case. Beyond podcasting, just VoIP recording in general. So if you're using Skype and say you're doing a job interview with somebody, and you're interviewing somebody to hire them for a job, and you have other people that you want to listen to the conversation, you might say, hey, I'm going to record this call, and then you can play it for other people after the fact if they're not able to make a meeting, something like that. The cool one that we've seen, it pops up infrequent. It's always nice to hear is people use it for if they're having a call with a relative or something who lives far away. So again, voice recording over Skype or over any of the VoIP services, but archiving that for later. If you have a conversation with somebody and you don't know when the next time you'll speak to them is, or an older relative, that's definitely something that's really nice to hear, that we're sort of helping people preserve that forever. Yeah. So those are off the top of my head, those are some of the biggest use cases. But you used a good phrase, sort of a utility knife or Swiss Army knife for audio, and that's really sort of what it's aimed at now, is that anything you want to do with audio on the Mac, especially related to recording audio, you do it.
Yeah, and that's it's something where I think people might hear it as like if you're in the podcasting world, I'm sure you've heard of it as like the app musician, but like the main goal obviously of Audio Hijack is that and more, and so it's a super powerful app to have in your toolbox, like I keep saying, and it's something where it can be used for folks. I recommend it, and I've been publishing videos on my YouTube channel of just like random stuff to do with Audio Hijack, just because I think people don't know like there's only so much marketing you guys can do, obviously, but like it feels like this thing that I want people to be like, hey, this is really cool what you can do with this, and how simple it makes other stuff that, like trying to force GarageBand to take 2 inputs, let's say, even where you want your mic and then some software like Farrago or whatever that you want to be able to record that at the same time, and GarageBand just makes it incredibly frustrating. excuse me, is a typical Apple thing where they make something so easy you think, oh, it's so easy and I should be able to do anything I want with it, but actually they've said, no, we're not going to develop stuff for X, Y, and Z, and so then that's where Audio Hijack, I find, steps in, and you don't even need GarageBand loaded. It's an editing app after the fact, let's say, but just really powerful stuff. And it's kind of like I'm sure friends and family around me are like, I don't even need anything with audio. Why are you telling me about this?
Keep telling them, we don't mind. We're okay with it. No, it is. You raise a good point though. It is great to hear random things that people are doing with it. We always like to hear those use cases, because sometimes that random thing is something that 10 other people need, or 100 other people need, or
right.
Maybe it's a bigger use case than we even realize. And you mentioned early on user feedback. That's definitely a big way that we focus on the next version of the software or the next app that we're going to make, is what are people doing with it, and then what are people trying to that they can't do yet. So.
Yeah. And I guess just to quickly ask, what's the best way for folks to send in feedback, I guess, if they're wanting to, for any of the apps that you guys develop?
Yeah, we route everything through email. We have a top-notch support team, a couple guys working for us doing support, round the clock. And we take everything in via email and then route that. It's a small company. There's 11 of us, so it's not a huge company or anything. It's not going to get lost in the shuffle. Mm-hmm. But it's something where it routes through there, and we say, okay, we have one request for this. We'll make a case for it, and people want X, Y, Z. And then over 6 months, we might say, hey, you know what? We got 15 requests for that. Do we want to implement that, or how can we implement that, or how does it relate to what we're already doing? Yeah. Definitely email. We're on Twitter, but when anything gets longer than 140, 280 characters, we route people to our email, because Twitter's not a great way to interact in a deep way with somebody who has questions or requests or things like that. So email support has been something we've been very focused on from day one, and always wanted to get that feedback from people and questions from people, and then provide as much help as we can there.
Yeah, they've been, whoever it was, I can't remember off the top of my head whoever it was that answered and responded to I know I had Loopback questions back before I bought it, because I was like, I think this can do what I want, but before I drop my money or whatever. And then there is test trial versions and stuff, so people can check that out, obviously. But yeah, just like, and someone responded very quickly and very helpful. One thing I know in terms of feature requests that's kind of a bit of confusion maybe for folks right now is there's a lot of folks out there who use Nicecast and stream whether it's a podcast or maybe they have an internet radio station, and they stream that out using Nicecast, which was an app you guys developed that basically took audio from your computer and then sent it to an Icecast or I always forget the other one. Internet server. Showcast, yes, thank you.
Yep.
And that app now has been discontinued and sort of rolled into, I don't know what the proper term is, but rolled into Audio Hijack as a feature now inside of Audio Hijack, which to me was great, because I did have Nicecast from before, but I had stopped using it because we don't do the Nicecast or Showcast streaming anymore here at Good Stuff. But I think for a lot of folks, it makes a lot of sense to have that all in one. But I know there's a bit of worry or about switching to a different app probably, and a workflow that works. Now I have to add this other thing that has all these boxes and blocks and stuff, and I'm used to the simple whatever Nicecast arrangement. So I guess what's been your response and sort of suggestions for folks as they look at switching and contemplate that?
Yeah, so Nicecast, like you mentioned, was a tool we made that was in 2003, so that was very early on, and it survived for almost 15 years. But it was basically, we updated it for quite a while, but at a certain point, it was no longer popular enough to receive the resources that it needed to get Nicecast version 2 and version 3 and so on, and broadcasting to an MP3 stream is something that is still done by plenty of people, but is not not in its ascendancy. It's definitely sort of flattened off or even tailed off as people do things like Facebook streaming and YouTube live streaming and things like that. Basically, it was a product we had that we knew we had some users for, and we knew how many users we had over a decade and a half. And it was functionality that we didn't necessarily want to get rid of, but we couldn't devote the resources to a standalone product. So like you said, we discontinued the product, we retired the product. It still works, it's still supported through the end of this year, but we stopped updates to it. And then after we heard from some more people who said, hey, I still need this, I'm still doing X, Y, and Z with it. A big thing that people are still doing with it is podcast live stream. So we're doing a video live stream right now, but people do audio live streams just to a relatively cheap or even a free MP3 server. And we said, all right, well, it fits pretty well with Audio Hijack. We'd always sort of had this idea, but it wasn't clear if it was going to make sense to integrate it into Audio Hijack. But so yeah, we added what we call the broadcast block to Audio Hijack, and that takes a lot of the functionality of Nicecast and lets you stream that audio the same way that you were before out to an internet radio server, and then listeners can tune into it. You made a good point that there should be some trepidation anytime your workflow gets disrupted, and it's not something we do lightly. We didn't, just say, okay, that's dead. Everybody moved to this. You're all set, good to go, done. Yeah. Right, exactly. It was definitely something where we kept Nicecast going for a long time, probably beyond beyond where it made sense for us, but kept it going because we knew there were users out there. And when we eventually made this decision to retire it, we have a couple blog posts on moving to other solutions. And then now that Audio Hijack includes this broadcast block, we have a post on, moving from Nicecast to Audio Hijack. And again, our support team is certainly here to help anybody who's used Nicecast and now wants to use Audio Hijack. And it's something that, we didn't take it lightly to say, okay, you're going to need to move to this. But, technology marches forward. Apple marches forward. Nicecast was, I don't know how technical we should get on this, but Nicecast was a 32-bit application that was going to need to be completely rewritten on 10.15 or higher, and on 10.14 it was going to complain, and it just wasn't feasible to continue supporting on its own. So we did what we think is sort of the next best thing, and honestly in some ways a better thing, and that was to roll it into Audio Hijack and say, okay, this functionality will continue to exist for many years to come. It just will come in a different package. And if you spend, I don't want to undersell it, but if you spend 15 or 30 minutes, you can probably get set up the same way that you were. And once you get used to it, it'll work, I think, better than it did before. There definitely is a learning curve to get there, but I think overall it's a better solution for users now. So
yeah, and I guess I won't quote you. I'm quoting my own brain here, so don't. But there was an upgrade coupon if you had Nicecast, you could get Audio Hijack at a slightly discounted price, possibly.
Yep. Yeah, that's still the case.
Yeah, and yeah, I think there's actually have a video on my YouTube channel. That's another one of those random things where it's like there's probably. Yeah, like you said, the markets or the use case for live streaming to an audio internet radio station is dwindling, I'm sure, but there's probably some people out there. And so I did a screencast of using Audio Hijack to set up an audio live stream to a Shoutcast server. The whole video is 27 minutes. That's start to finish of like installing. I mean, I guess I had Audio Hijack installed already, but that's not that difficult. But getting that set up, registering a domain, setting up the Shoutcast server information, and then putting that into Audio Hijack in the block, in the streaming block, and out.
Yeah, so that's the most difficult setup you could have if you're doing your own hosting, and if you're not using one of the services that are out there, which many people already are. So it's hopefully, we certainly tried to make it as easy as possible to transition. The ideal for a lot of people would have been this should just keep working forever, and I don't necessarily disagree, but that's not the reality of it. So we tried to do the next best thing.
Yeah, and I think you are like it's pulling the Band-Aid off now versus later. I think because people ultimately will end up with a better solution in Audio Hijack because it gives them way more options as to what they're streaming out. I had a client who wanted to deal with, he had an internet radio station. He was doing that exact transition from Nicecast and trying to figure it out. And then I showed him some of the like EQing and noise removal and stuff that you could do on the stream's as the stream was headed out of his computer, basically with Audio Hijack. And it was like, his mind kind of blown or whatever. Coincidentally enough, I think I put this in as a tweet maybe, but my stream just died here on Ecamm Live, so I resumed it. So apologies to everybody who's watching and trying to keep up with this. I don't know if it's creating new streams every time or what's going on, but out of that Nicecast to Audio Hijack transition for the streaming, I would love, and maybe I'm the only one who would love to be able to do this, what we're exactly doing, but skip the video part. Just send, if Audio Hijack could send like just a placeholder image, and that would be the one thing it's sending. So there's no HD, whatever video that's worrying about, but just bandwidth limited to really good audio going out. And we could just replace a lot of those Shoutcast servers, no offense to those companies, I'm sure they're great, with a free, like what I'm doing, Twitch, Periscope, YouTube, etc.
Facebook Live, YouTube Live.
Yeah, exactly. And then that to me would be whatever the phrase, cat's pajamas or.
Well, you're certainly not the only one interested in doing that, and it's I will say it's something we have kicking around internally. So we will see what happens in the future as far as the ability to do that. It's definitely that was certainly part of the thought process in terms of retiring Nicecast was that, there aren't a whole lot of new services that are doing MP3 streaming. There are a whole lot of what's called RTMP streaming is what, Facebook Live and YouTube Live use. And it's certainly not that much different to go broadcast to those than it is to broadcast to an MP3 server. So it is something where, like I said, we've got something kicking around internally, and we'll see what happens in the future. It's all I'll say on it right now, but it's definitely, we're aware of the use case.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure. I'll raise my hand right now for beta testing if
beta testing. Yeah, I figured. Okay,
if that ever comes. Speaking of which, beta testing. This last year, I think, like you said, you had, or a year ago, anyways, somewhere around there, you had launched a new app called Farrago, which you did through the beta testing program, which I got to be a part of, and sort of testing out the. It's a soundboard app, and that's what, like I said early in the show, we're using here a lot of good stuff in making goofy noises and intro music and things like that. I have a YouTube podcast I do where we pull random quotes from the band from over the years and just kind of play them at appropriate times that make people laugh or whatever.
Which is why Edge and I have taken up miniature golf.
So I didn't route the audio for Paul, so he didn't hear that, but...
That's right, I didn't hear it, so whatever, I bet it was good.
Yeah, Bono talking about mini golf. So, there you go. And so combined with, this is where it kind of gets messy in your head, because Farrago works great on its own, and it can be a powerful, like especially if you're recording on your computer or in a room with other friends, maybe putting a podcast together, or for I've heard of like stage productions, maybe using it at theaters and things like that, where they want just like a soundboard that goes out to the PA system. You just added MIDI support, which for triggering sound effects and things like that. And I'm trying to think of other use cases, but basically, where especially Mac audio nerds, who in the past had to deal with really ugly, hopefully none of them are listening, but the soundboard apps of the past were just janky, ugly, felt like a Windows 3.1 port to the Mac. Farrago came along with a weird name, but a very beautiful interface to use, and being developed actively, obviously, as well. And so, if you're out there and somehow you've managed to not hear about it because you're listening to me, but you've never heard me talk about it for some reason, you definitely need to check it out first of all. But what's the sort of internal pitch? What am I describing sort of the scenario where you saw the need for this kind of thing, or was there some use case that you had that this kind of came about from?
No, that's absolutely it. Is that there are and certainly have been a few soundboard apps for the Mac that were functional but not stellar is probably what I'd say about most of them. And we said, okay, we know we have a lot of podcasters. Audio Hijack is used by a lot of podcasters, and a couple of our other tools are used by a lot of podcasters. Percentage of them certainly can use a soundboard app as well, and we can probably make a pretty good soundboard app. It fits in with what we are, which is an audio software company, even if we didn't intend to be. And so that was sort of, it wasn't any more of a pitch than that. Was beyond, we have a market for this, and users that we already have will purchase this additional tool. And then beyond that, it became, let's talk to theater techs and see what they need, because that's not a market we've attacked before, or a market that we've been in before. Even if our tools are used there, it's not one that we focused on. So we had some interviews with a couple of theater techs who were looking for, that led to, you mentioned some of the new stuff we've done. We added a dark mode like a month before Apple added dark mode to Mojave.
Right.
But we added a dark mode in part because theater tech said, hey, I use this in a darkened theater. I'm in the back of the house, and I don't want to have a bright screen right in my face. So that was the first app that we added that really truly had a light versus dark mode, because it was the first one that really needed it, more so than just, hey, I want it to look cool. Fascinating use case that is not one that I would use it for or even would have thought of, but tabletop gamers. So people doing like Dungeons and Dragons, things like that, they want to add to the game itself. So, background ambiance, and then literally sound effects of swords clashing and monsters growling and things like that. That's tremendously cool to me, tremendously nerdy, I'm sure most people will think, but I don't use that word as a pejorative. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a use case that we've heard multiple people that said, "Oh, this is awesome. It's people are getting so immersed. We're having so much fun with this." And people are having fun setting up the sounds and then playing the sounds when they're actually playing the game. And that's very cool, and not anything that we ever would have said, "Hey, let's make a tool that does this." I don't think if we marketed it solely on that, it would have been any good. But hope Hijack and Farrago and other tools are useful for a half dozen or a dozen use cases that we wouldn't have even thought of, and then we hear about them and can say, okay, can we make it a little bit better in any way to improve the way that works for you, and that's always a fun process to sort of finesse the product a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I would say to anybody. Again, like I'm sort of preaching to the Mac nerds, the audio nerds of the day, but where you use an audio app, and you felt like, if only it might do this or whatever, but that the last time the company tweeted was 5 years ago, and the last time the app was updated was 10 years ago or whatever. That's where Rogue Amoeba has been awesome, an answer to many audio nerds' prayers on the Mac side, that's for sure, in terms of actively developing, listening to the users, and improving the apps in various ways. And obviously also at times you have to say no, or you have to, like in the case of Nicecast, you have to make the business call obviously as well. And it's not like we expect, or people should expect, that you can do everything for everybody, but definitely are very good at listening and making changes and helping improve an app, and little things that I know, like especially when you're developing into a new space that you haven't worked in before, but you've sort of seen like with Farrago, and being aware of things, and sort of listening to users and responding very quickly with updates and things like that. Like I think it was like a stop all button or something. There was just little things where I was like, oh, it would be great if, and I didn't even send in a request, and then the next version had those two or those things already fixed, because obviously other folks are more vocal than I was. So, and you guys obviously picked up on stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's a very powerful app. Editing, not editing, but I guess you do a bit of like trimming on audio files within.
There's a little bit of waveform adjustments that you can do. But.
And then you would obviously, in the Rogue Amoeba world anyways, you would send stuff out to Fission maybe, or for editing if you wanted to do more finessing of the actual audio off of there. But level controls, different color palettes for each shortcut to the different sound effects. You can have them loop, you can solo them, you can allow them to be paused or not, and then of course setting up either your keyboard or a MIDI controller to actually trigger stuff, and having multiple sets. It's awesome for me because I have for the different shows I do, I just have each show has its own set. Some of them have a couple has
a set specifically. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so it makes it easy. You're not just looking at a big, huge screen of things and trying to reorganize them every time for sound triggering and stuff like that. And for podcasts, that maybe I think of it just on the podcasting side. It's a neat way, especially what I do with clients is I'll edit their shows, and I'll just grab like random little funny things when they say something funny or goofy or inside jokes of the show or whatever. You sort of get to know the culture of a podcast, and then using those later on as a bit of a callback, maybe in live shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things like that. And definitely an audience appreciates it and enjoys it. It's kind of like a little thing like you're all in on. And I have to be careful because I end up just turning into giggling sound guy whenever I'm playing with Farrago, because it's just too fun to mess around with and try and make your co-host or whatever on a podcast break. So, which ties nicely, I guess I mentioned it. Fission is your audio editing app, and this is probably one where I think I heard you on another podcast being interviewed about this, where it's an audio editing app. It's a single. I want to say this right, like a one track, like a stereo, but
single track, yeah. Stereo editing, but single track.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so for folks who maybe are like coming from either up to Logic or down to or I guess sideways to GarageBand or whatever, it can be a little bit disorienting because you're like, okay, I thought this was, Rogue Amoeba does all this crazy stuff with Audio Hijack, and then this app is kind of really simplified. And I guess what's the reasoning behind not adding multi-track audio, I guess, to something like Fission for a podcaster? Because speaking from that podcasting use case, I guess specifically, that's the one sort of like holdback, I guess, in sort of you have a podcast bundle, which is great, where you can get Audio Hijack, Loopback, Farrago, and Fission. I think folks should definitely check that out. You can save a bunch of money and get 4 really powerful apps. But that's my one, I guess, hesitation in recommending Fission for people is the lack of a multitrack editor.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's good reason for that, but I guess what would that be?
Maybe we're just lazy. It might not be a good reason. It could be a terrible reason.
No, you hate multitrack audio with a passion.
No, well, so there is a fully valid point that for a lot of podcast editing, a lot of more detailed podcast editing, you definitely want a multi-track editor, and Fission is not that. And that's from our view, that's okay. There are great multi-track editors out there. GarageBand will work. Sound Studio is pretty good. Amadeus is out there on the Mac. So there are several. Audacity is out there, which there are several different options.
I don't understand how people look at that and think, like, this isn't the Mac or design or whatever snob in me, I guess. But like, how can people look at that and recommend? Like, it's free. I get that. Like,
right. That's how people recommend it. Because it's free and it works. But
anyway, sorry.
Fine. If people are interested in it, that's fine. And it's not what I would use. But when I have edited a podcast doing extensive editing, I have used Fission and Sound Studio. So Fission is definitely not designed for multi-track editing. It just doesn't exist in there. But it is used for what we call sort of top and tailing. Basically trimming a little bit here, adjusting some volume here, bleeping out a curse word if you need to, or whatever. So we have a lot of people that do more simplified podcast editing. They record a podcast, they record 60 minutes, and they say, okay, I don't need to, drop in anything, and or you can even drop in, but I don't need to rearrange things and edit sections out and things like that. I just need to normalize the audio and add some tags and upload it, and I'm done. So if you're doing more of the work up front, then there might be less editing on the backside, on the back end of it. And Fission's great for that. It's designed to be quick, and it's designed to do a half dozen things very quickly, very easily. It was never designed solely as a podcast editor, so that's part of the reason why there's not multi-track editing in it. People were recording, as I mentioned early on, people were recording internet radio streams, and let's say they were recording something and they wanted to save it. They recorded an hour-long concert, but there's a break or a commercial, and they wanted to just try it out. Fission was designed to make that 45-second process. And podcasting has grown as a use case, so we've sort of added some functionality that's related to podcasting to Fission. But in terms of multi-track editing, like I said, there's other solutions out there, and that's certainly currently what we recommend. Part of it is also interesting to note that early on, Fission's about 12 years old, I think. I'd have to check. It's old. And early on, the idea was to have Fission as a very simple audio editor that let you trim and break things down, hence the. And then, at least internally, a product called Fusion, which would have been terribly confusing because the names would have been almost identical. Yeah. But that would have been a tool, a multi-track editor that would have done a lot more high-end editing that people are looking for. And Fission was the first one that came out. It's the one that we've developed, but it's something where we said, okay, this does a whole lot of what a lot of people need. And Fusion, the internally named Fusion, is a product that definitely has a use case, but there are competitors out there that already do it, and something that we want to attack right now. And to this point, it has not been. And we're happy to recommend, something like Sound Studio or GarageBand to people who want that multi-track editing. So, I mean, the short answer is just it's something that we know people want to do, but it doesn't have to be with our tool. And as well, that Fission is useful for plenty of things that relate to podcasting or, relate to certain types of podcast editing. But if it's not the tool for you, then that's fine too. We don't have to be the end all be all for audio. We want to create as many useful audio tools as we can, but with 11 people, we can only make so many products. Yeah, which I think that's what's actually inspiring or creates confidence in me in a company like Rogue Amoeba, is that your ability to say no, even though there's potentially some money on the table that you might be leaving, but the back end support of a multi-track audio app, I can't imagine would be simple, obviously. Right. And Fission was designed, so the reason Fission came about is that, mid 2000s, when Audio Hijack was just a couple years old, people said, oh, I recorded this, but I need to cut a little bit out, or I need to normalize the audio, and there wasn't, and I'd say there still is not another good, simple audio editor. Mm-hmm. So you said you were on Windows before, but on the Mac, there was something called SoundEdit. SoundEdit 16, which is on like System 7, way right. 25 years ago. And this was a very simple audio editor that did a lot of what Fission does, black and white, very simple waveform. But, we sort of look at Fission as a 21st century version of this. And people needed simple editing ability, the same way that you can like trim video in on the iPhone very simply. There's not a whole lot that you can do with it, but you can get to what you need pretty easily. And we wanted to make a tool that did that. And instead of coming at it from the other angle of let's make it do everything, which, is sort of a departure from Audio Hijack, where Audio Hijack is hopefully enabling you to do just about anything you want to do with audio. Mm-hmm. Fission sort of comes at it and says there's a half dozen things that most people are going to need to do, and this will let you do them. So it's an interesting dichotomy between the two of them. But the best thing I always hear is that, Fission is great. Fission would be perfect if it just did this one extra thing. And I always tell the story because that one extra thing is different for every single person. Yeah. And when you add that one extra thing for 100 people, Fission is no longer this great simple editor. It's Microsoft Excel or Photoshop, where you know how to use 5% of it, and it costs $500. And so thus far, as you said, we've been able to say no and focus on a simple editor that hopefully meets 50 to 75% of people. And then if some people need something more advanced beyond that, they can either go to that or use it in conjunction with Fission.
Yeah, and the one thing I know, my partner here at Good Stuff, Kyle, uses it sometimes too, and I remember because he uses I think he's using Logic now. He's like a habitual app switcher for audio.
Okay.
But yeah, the one feature I know when I was trying it out too is it has is it lossless MP3 editing or saving or
yes,
right, and that's like which is a pretty big deal. Like if you're, because just like with a video or image editing, sorry, if you edit a JPEG and then you save it again, well, you've lost some image compression or image quality, and similarly with MP3. Yeah, Kyle just chimed in the chat. He said I do have a problem, but so with Fission, it's similar, right? Where you don't actually lose quality of an MP3 when you're saving it out.
Right. So basically, this is something that, to my knowledge, no other audio editor on the Mac does, and don't quote me on that. I just know it's sort of a major feature that when we came out with it, it was the only one out there. Basically, MP3 and AAC files are compressed lossily. So when you compress them, you lose some audio quality. The same thing as JPEG, just like you said. And when you edit them in any other audio editor, it has to pull it back out to raw audio. You edit, and then you re-encode it to MP3 or AAC, and you lose quality again the second time. And if you make more edits, you're going to lose quality. So the example we used to use is like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Gets worse and worse. And with Fission, when you edit MP3 or AAC, it edits, I sort of say, right inside of the format. And so you don't ever recompress. So you never, beyond that initial audio encoding that you did, you don't ever lose audio quality on top of that. And yeah, it's something that Alex, I mentioned Alex, one of our co-founders here, really did some black magic on the back end to make that possible. But it's interesting because it has sort of application somewhat artificially, because you can only do so many operations losslessly. There are things that you cannot do. You can't add audio effects on top of the audio. So people say, oh, I use Fission, it's great, but I want to, add an equalizer to the audio. And we say, well, that's not currently possible because we're doing this lossless editing. In the future, we might have a lossy mode where you're able to do that. It's certainly not something I'd rule out, but it was a useful constraint because it made us say, well, you can't do that right now, and we'll see how badly we need that in the future, and if it's worth doing or not.
Yeah, and Kyle just chimed in here too, is saying it's so incredibly fast. I love it, and that's where I find myself. I reach for it because I have the whatever you call it, the trial or demo version installed on my Mac, and so I'll go to open an audio file. I'll like drag down the list and see like, okay, Logic is what I'm looking for because that's what I use typically, and then I see Fission. I'm like, I should go buy it. This would be so much quicker than firing up Logic and have it go run through all the plugins and then like some sort of crazy template opens up and I'm like all of a sudden I'm editing a symphony when I just wanted to like chop up some audio and like, no, not this time. I'm gonna save. but I know it's a matter of time probably before I become a Fission user as well, because it feels like to me as a what am I trying to say, like a budget conscious nerd who doesn't want to just buy every app that I think I might need. It feels like I've already got audio apps. I don't need another one. And this is where Kyle has the benefit, I guess, of just throwing money at the problem. But I should just, because it is really, it has its own use case. It's not something you might use every time if you're a a multi-track podcast editing nerd like me. But it definitely has a use case, and I think a worthwhile one at the price point that it's at.
Yeah, and like you said, it's something where instead of diving into Logic for 5 minutes just to boot it up, this is hopefully something that in 30 seconds you can get done what you need to.
Yeah.
And it's valuable to have two different options. I have a car and I have a bicycle, and I use some of them for some things and some for other things. They don't need to be the same thing. So
yeah. Whereas my family, we all ride on one bike together, just to save some money.
Is it a 4-person tandem bike? What do you got?
It's a Canadian thing. One of the other apps. So I'll just briefly run over. So Piezo is actually a simple recording app. So it's kind of like audio. This probably isn't any branding, but Audio Hijack Lite in a sense, where you want to be able to just record something, and you don't want to mess around with having Audio Hijack. I guess if Audio Hijack in the previous analogy is Logic and Piezo is maybe the Fission. I don't know. We're mixing up weird analogies here. So, and something's the bike and something's the car. But anyways, it's a really simple, especially if you're a podcaster and you have someone that you want them to record their audio on a Skype call, do the double ender or whatever. But that's where you can send them Piezo, or either the goodness of your heart in your wallet, or maybe they buy it because they're going to use it a lot. And they don't need to know how to use QuickTime. They don't need to know how to do anything else. It's a very simple app to use, but reliable, and will record the audio, and then they can send you the audio from their end, and you've got pristine audio, or at least as pristine as their mic allows, to record and to edit with later. So is there any other sort of, I guess, the sales pitch on Piezo from Rogue Amoeba's side is what?
The initial impetus for making it was to get Audio Hijack into the Mac App Store. So to get an Audio Hijack-like tool into the Mac App Store.
Yeah.
So that's 2010-ish, 2010 era. And Piezo is no longer in the Mac App because of various changes that Apple made. And shortly after it got in the Mac App Store, rules were changed such that it was difficult to keep in the Mac App Store. But that was the initial reason to create it. Everything that you said is certainly accurate, that it's useful to have a tool that basically, there is literally one big red button that you click and it starts recording whatever you've told it to record. So I'm actually using it right now instead of Audio Hijack. I use Audio Hijack, but to record this, I just pointed it at my microphone and hit the record button. And yeah, it's a great tool if you're somebody who just needs a very simple, I need to record from a microphone, or I need to record from this app on my Mac, and just click and done. Audio Hijack is certainly, I would say Audio Hijack is what we recommend for most people. We try and make it as straightforward as possible and as uncomplicated as possible, such that almost anyone can use it. But if you just say, hey, I have 5 minutes to get this set up, and I don't need the power that you're providing there, then Piezo is certainly sort of what we would recommend in that case anyway.
Yeah, it's it's 19 US versus 59 US. So it is in that sweet spot of like a quick app that you can buy, and if you're going to use it a few times, it pays for itself in terms of simplicity, that's for sure. And then also the other one I'll just mention too is SoundSource, which is an interesting. It's free or free with licenses with purchase of other apps?
If you own any of other software, SoundSource is free. Otherwise, it is $10.
Yeah.
Wow, I should know that, shouldn't I? I believe it's 10.
Okay. You've got a lot of apps now. It's not just you're not just an Audio Hijack company anymore. But yeah, it's basically, instead of on the Mac, your audio controller, which in the top menu bar, if you click on that, and you can see your volume control, obviously, and then your output devices. It's an improved version of that where you get a lot more control over which input, which output device, all those kind of things, where things are going. I'm probably doing the poor man's sales pitch on it, but it's designed to be a better audio controller for the Mac, and it was something that we had a couple free applications that called, as I said, it's still free as any of our other stuff, and if you only want this, then it's $10, which is hopefully cheap enough that it's easy to buy. But yeah, I believe the marketing pitch on it right now is the sound control that should be built into Mac OS. Yeah.
Which is what that came about because it's what we heard from a lot of users. So
yeah, and it, like, even as what SoundSource does. So, and I apologize to anybody watching on the live stream. For some reason, it's either Ecamm Live or my internet. Maybe my kids are all gone, so Netflix and stuff should be free, but
shouldn't be. Maybe
my wife is uploading a bunch of stuff right now to Instagram or something. I don't know. So I apologize if you have to keep refreshing and joining in. The podcast will be available in audio form, of course, later. Goodstuff.fm/SMYM, and you can find it there. So the final piece in the puzzle that actually is one of the more, it feels like so Loopback is the app I'm talking about, and it's I guess the marketing pitch from you guys is enjoy cable-free routing. Oh, I just lost it here. Enjoy cable-free audio routing with powerful virtual audio devices. And it's one of the ones that's hard to explain if you've never needed it, because you think, why would I need that? But once you need it, you're like, holy crap, this is awesome because I need this broadcast that I'm doing that's failing all over
right. Give them the real world use case.
Yeah.
That's what I want to hear.
And it's no fault of Loopback or Rogue Amoeba software right now. I don't even think it's Ecamm Live's fault. I think it's just a bandwidth issue with my internet for some reason this morning, of course. But so I've got Ecamm Live that allows me to choose just through their design. They have, I'll just pull up the audio controls. I can choose a mic input device. I can choose, and then I have and that's one volume control, and I have Skype volume control. So Paul's audio is coming in from Skype, and Ecamm grabs that as it goes by and spits it back out to the live stream so that they can hear it, obviously, and then I can also hear it in my headphones. And so I can control Paul. If he starts shouting at me, I can just turn him off volume-wise. And but then the main input from my computer, is one thing. And so I could choose my mic. I could choose the internal mic. I can choose some other connection with my USB sound input mixer. But I can only choose one thing. And so if I wanted to have the very important ability to send like sound effects like that to the stream, I can't do that. I have to choose one or the other. And actually, it's almost,
right.
I don't know, it's not impossible, but it's very hard to get Farrago into Ecamm Live, let's say, where it has a one input
right, because they're only letting you choose audio devices.
Yeah, so it's not letting me choose
as
software.
A software application.
Yeah, and so that's where before in the past I would actually start up audio Hijack and create things and trying to like route them through, but then sometimes you couldn't hear it on your end and Ecamm could or whatever. So Loopback allows me to create an audio device called, I just call it Ecamm Live Source, and then inside Loopback I choose my microphone, I choose Farrago, I could choose anything else, Fortnite, whatever game or app that I have running on my Mac, basically. And then all of the audio that comes out of those things, those apps, gets routed into that one device. And so then Ecamm Live, in this case, I can choose that as a source, and all that audio goes out. Each of their volume controls on the app, so Farrago's volume control, my mic volume control, Fortnite's volume control, whatever apps I'm sending, their volume levels are respected, I guess. And then there's obviously the master level that I send out through Ecamm Live. And so for podcasters, video game streamers, again, I'm curious where you guys have seen use cases for Loopback, but for anybody in that space that I know I've spent time in, it's an invaluable piece of software. And there was, like, Apple has their audio MIDI control app, which again feels like you're
audio MIDI setup is
right.
what it's called, which is a weird name that.
Yeah, and I know, like, I'm the cheap guy who's for years tried to fight with that and previous to that was Soundflower was a really popular one. It still gets recommended by people as a viable option, air quotes viable option for doing this kind of stuff. And so Loopback aims to replace all of that, because you can sort of do some of this with Apple's built-in tools, but it's really painful and confusing, and it resets on me all the time and stuff. And similarly, Soundflower was functional but very confusing to use, and it alternates between being supported and not supported anymore, developed, not developed. So I think right now we're in a developed phase for Soundflower maybe, but don't quote me on that. And judging by Paul's face, don't quote him on it either.
Yeah, I'm not well, so you mentioned audio MIDI setup, which is a useful tool, but does not work with software. So you can't pull in software applications there. Right. You can only pull in audio devices. And Soundflower that we actually, for a time, was bundled with some of our software years ago. For about a year, we were actually maintaining it, but just didn't have the resources to do it because it's a free application that was developed 5 or 10 years ago, 10 years ago probably. The original developer sort of didn't have time for it, and we said, all right, well, we'll host it and sort of shepherd it, but there's not a whole lot we can do because we have these paid products that we need to create. And we eventually said, all right, look, we know that there's functionality here that people want and people need. But it needs to be properly supported, and to be properly supported, it needs to be something that people purchase, because if we justify spending the time on creating this. So Loopback is entirely, clean room engineered. This is code that we already had before we had any interaction with Soundflower. But we were on sort of a parallel track. Had Soundflower sitting over here, and we were hosting it and making it available to people, but not really doing any development on it. And we were developing Loopback, and we said, all right, we need to hand this back off to the open source community, and someone else can maintain it. And as you said, I'm not sure right now if it's fully maintained, if it's going to be updated for Mojave, or what the situation is there. I frankly have sort of stopped paying attention to it, because we have a solution that yes, it costs money, but it's also supported, and we'll be working on Mojave on day one when that ships. And basically, if you're a professional who needs this technology, hopefully it's worth it to you to purchase it. If you run a podcast, and especially if you have a podcast that you sell ads on, or that you're making money from, it's worth paying for the tools that will make that podcast work. So the initial impetus was to say, hey, this is functionality that people need, and let's make a properly supported, properly designed, not designed by committee and not sort of cobbled together. There's open source software can be great. It certainly can be very functional, but I personally find it better to have one or a small team focused on the design of software and making it work the way that it ideally should for most people, instead of just saying, hey, let's add this feature and this feature and this feature, and then you've got a very functional tool that is very hard to use. So Loopback was designed to make this a whole lot simpler. And you did a pretty good job explaining it. Before we shipped it a couple years ago, I was terrified that we were not going to be able to explain it at all in a way that was going to be useful, because Audio Hijack, the pitch is literally record any audio. Any audio playing on your Mac, you can record it. Audio Hijack will take care of that. And it does a whole lot more than that now, but that's the simple pitch. And Fission is edit any audio, faxing, and Loopback is the pitch is, like you said, cable-free audio routing on your Mac. And that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot until, like you said, you need it. And then you might say, oh, wait a minute, I can route audio between this application and this application. Or I have two different hardware devices, two different mics, or a mic and a musical instrument that I want to bring in, and I need to bring them into GarageBand. GarageBand can only take one audio input. Mm-hmm. So it's something where hopefully, and it's proved to be the case. We were hopeful that people would get it, and it has certainly proved to be the case that people get it and then ideally recommend it and say, oh, this is exactly what you need for this. Go download it and try it out. And like I said, it was something we were terrified that we were not going to be able to explain properly at all, because it's probably you can do the most complicated things with it, or the most complex things with it, out of any of our software. And our goal, or my goal, certainly has always been to make this functionality simple and user accessible, or accessible to as many people as possible. And this is something that's a little higher end. It's something that's more useful to professionals and people doing podcasts and doing more complex audio setups. And that has value too, obviously, but it makes it a little harder to explain and to market.
Yeah. It's one that you can, I know from my own experience, on a few different occasions, I've gotten myself into some audio trouble where I've created devices and looping, almost like like the name, Loopback. I have Loopback, which is something in audio you don't want, is like a loop that's going and you're getting feedback or whatever.
Feedback, right.
And so I've created things where all of a sudden I'm blasting myself with static or whatever from some app that doesn't work properly or whatever. And again, I think it's 99% of the time it's user error, because it gives you a lot of power over where audio is being sent and coming from on your Mac, and in that power comes great responsibility. And so you can do some weird stuff. And especially now that you've added, like, this is where my brain hurts, and I sometimes wish for I actually want cabled routing on my Mac, not like where I actually have to
right.
Because sometimes I can make this device like with looped or nested devices now in Loopback, where you can have a set of apps that are all like, my Ecamm live stream or whatever, a selection, that's one device, audio device, and then I can select that inside GarageBand, let's say, but I could then nest that inside another audio device that makes even more stuff go together. So yeah, it's you can kind of get at least for me, old audio nerd like me, I guess, I get my head wrapped around something and stuck. But
no, I absolutely. So my experience mostly is that in testing this and fiddling with it, losing audio. So I will be muting audio somewhere that's routing into an audio device, and I don't realize it. Then I don't hear audio, and I say, hell, what did I do? I gotta go fiddle in Loopback and fix it. Ideally, one, you said that you used the phrase user error, and that may be the case, but it is certainly something that we try and design out of the software. So we try and make it difficult to screw up. That's not always possible, and there is a trade-off between how much power you give and how much how many difficulties you can create with that power. But it is certainly something where we're aware of the complexity of this and try and make it as straightforward as possible and try and avoid the situations where you get into, audio on you or static blasting at you or whatever. And we're currently working on updates to the interface. So Loopback 1, when it shipped, we said, okay, we're going to put this out there. We know people will need this functionality, but we don't know how well it'll be received, and we don't know quite how to explain it. So if you look at Loopback 1, it has what I think is a fairly simplistic interface. And we have some internal testing going on with sort of an updated interface that will be much more visual. So you mentioned Audio Hijack earlier, having these blocks where audio flows from block to block, and something somewhat similar in terms of seeing how audio flows in Loopback will hopefully make it clear. And it won't be physical wires, obviously, but it will give you sort of a more physical or visual image of how you're routing audio right now. And then you can see, oh, obviously this is screwed up because that audio is not routing to anything. So that's why I'm not hearing it, or something along those lines. So it's definitely something where, yes, you can look at something and say, oh, I screwed up the configuration of this, but the software can do a better job of guiding you on that configuration, and that's something that we're looking to do in the future.
Right. So at some point, I guess I'll just live stream myself to Rogue Amoeba trying to use it, and then you can be like, oh, okay, this is where Chris screws up. Let's put the Chris button or whatever, where he can undo the things that he keeps doing. Because there's the ability to mute audio sources inside of the Loopback device, and then where I choose to monitor audio through, that's like my brain is like, I don't get it. I don't know what's happening quite here, and that's where I know I end up screwing up something, because then Ecamm, let's say, or other apps will also be monitoring that audio, and then when the sort of Frankenstein monster of sort of audio nerdery, I guess, is like Audio Hijack running and Loopback, and sometimes this is what maybe there's a mental model here that I'm missing, but Audio Hijack grabs, say, Farrago, the audio from our Farrago. I have to like visualize this on my hand or whatever, but on the screen. But like and so then I'm not necessarily hearing it unless I choose and make an output device in Audio Hijack. Whereas with my microphone, and I think I know why this works, but like my microphone, I can create an input device of my mic and record that, and I still hear my mic in my USB headset or whatever that I've got hooked up. Whereas Farrago, I create it into Audio Hijack and a recorder, and I don't hear it anymore once I hit record on Audio Hijack. Right? Does that make sense?
Yep. If you don't have an output, then it will default to not outputting anywhere. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, so what you just described, that's your configuration, and you could say, oh, user error because you didn't put an output. But the problem there is that some people want to have a configuration where they don't hear the output from an application and they're just recording it. And so we need to provide both options. And yet at the same time, we want to make sure that people don't get in a situation where they're not hearing audio that they expect to hear.
Yeah.
We want them to not hear the audio that they don't want to hear, and we want them to hear the audio that they want to hear. And so it's always tricky to provide this power. And hopefully there is a whole lot of power here, but provide it in such a way that people don't get confused by it.
Yeah, and lots of people would probably, might be using the built-in inputs and not a USB device to get their audio in, and so like that's where for me it's confusing, because like the Focusrite device that I have plugged in is actually where I'm hearing the audio through, so that's why it doesn't matter what Audio Hijack does with the audio once it hits the computer. I'm still hearing myself in my headphones from the monitor off the USB device, and so
off the device itself. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no way for you to like provide a user error, or a warning even, because like how many different devices could people be using, and whether they're even using that or not, and all sorts of different scenarios and combinations. But I do appreciate your attempts to make me feel better about my issues.
No, I mean it's something where we have tens of thousands of users, and they're all doing different things, and we focus on something like VoIP recording. We have a template in Audio Hijack that will work, and it will work in a specific way, but then people want something a little bit different, and we make it possible to do, but there's only so much we can do in terms of making it easy to do. So we make as much easy as we can, and then beyond that, we make even more stuff possible, but it might require you to learn a little bit more, to understand a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where we land in terms of you were talking about Apple sort of oversimplifying things, where they stop and they say, okay, this is what you can do, and if you want to do more, you simply can't do it. We try and err a little bit more on providing that power, maybe tucking it away. We have some advanced pop-ups and things like that where it's tucked away, and the might say, oh, you know what, that's advanced, I don't even want to touch it, and hopefully that works. But we want to at least provide that power if people need it.
Yeah. Two quick questions, or well, maybe not quick, I guess, but we'll see. that I wanted to ask you about, just in terms of obviously being a Mac developer. Have you taken any steps ever to do any of this? Like Farrago seems like an obvious one that could live on an iPad, let's say, for folks. And have you taken any attempts, or I forget if the Rogue Amoeba history completely, maybe you have done this already, but to develop iOS apps? And related to that was a question actually from Kyle here. He's just saying, has the audio hijack interface been influenced by iOS and audio routing applications there? Did a redesign start with the iPad or touchscreen consideration maybe? Because it does feel on a Mac a bit like what you sort of touch on an iPad, I guess, in terms of routing and things like that. So I guess that's sort of a two-parter, and then
that's a two-parter, yeah. So the short answer to iOS is that we have made multiple attempts on iOS. Very early on, we had a tool on iOS called Radio Shift Touch, which was a tool for streaming audio, streaming radio. So 50, 60,000 radio stations online that you can listen to. And it was $9.99, which in 2009, I want to say, was fairly expensive, even though that $10 is not very expensive realistically, but prices were driven down from there. We had competitors that came in at $2.99 and then 99 cents. And the summary that I've come to in my head is that we want to make sort of deeper applications, deeper feature-rich applications, and iOS, the market, unfortunately, does not really reward that right now. It's getting perhaps a little bit better with subscriptions and the ability to charge people over time, where they get the software for 99 cents and then it adds a feature and they stay subscribed, so they pay another 99 cents, whatever. But that's still not prevalent right now. Whereas I can say, hey, this application is $30 or $50 or even $100, but it does what you need, and we will continue to develop it and support it. There is just a culture of paying for software on the Mac that is obviously much more useful. It's if we sell Loopback for $99 and we sell any tool for 99 cents on the iPhone or the iPad, obviously we need to sell 100 times as many copies to make as much money. And actually it's a lot more than that, because Apple's going to take their 30%. So we need to sell about 140 copies before we're going to make that same amount of revenue from one copy of Loopback on the Mac. Right. So the short version is that the business dynamics of it, or the business realities of it, have not been in terms of making products for iOS. Obviously, the iOS platform has, I don't even know what the number is, over 1 billion users now. So the volume could potentially be there. But if those people aren't paying for software, then it doesn't really matter. It's the number of people interested to pay for software that matters. So something like Farrago is the interface would adapt to an iPad very easily. It's certainly something that people have requested, but it's not necessarily something that people will pay for.
Right.
And it's not necessarily something that it's worth. It's not as simple. I don't know how, different listeners have different technical understanding, but it's not as simple as just clicking a button and then set iPad version. There's some overlap, and there's some, some of the work we've done on the Mac will translate to the iPad if we said, let's make an iPad version. But it's not as simple as that, and it would be two parallel products. And so I always say, right now we're still focused on the Mac. The Mac is still serving us well. The Mac is still a powerful tool for people that are looking to do what we're providing tools for. And so that's sort of where we're focused. iOS is always, sort of in the background of, hey, how could we make money off this, or how can we make a tool that makes money off this? So we have a product called Airfoil that you mentioned briefly for streaming audio. And we have a tool called Airfoil Satellite, which lets you remotely control that product and receive audio from that product. So that's a free to the Mac app and to the Windows app that we have there. And it just sort of increases the value of the Mac app. But to use it, you really need to pay for the Mac app. So that's sort of the value proposition that we've got there, that it's worth having this free product that will drive sales of a Mac product.
Right.
So that's certainly the first part of the question. Now I have forgotten what the second part of the question
Well,
was.
I'll come back to that one. Actually, just prompted a use case for airfoil that I've always wanted Apple to do. So, and maybe this is not what airfoil. This is definitely not what airfoil is designed for. But this is a very specific use case for me, where my kids are downstairs watching something on the Apple TV. I want to be able to shout into my phone and have it come out the Apple TV.
The Apple TV, yeah.
Or I guess if they were playing on their iPad or whatever, right? They'd have to be running airfoil satellite for me to send audio to them somehow.
To send audio to it.
Like it's supper time.
So the
whatever.
Absolutely. Well, so the biggest problem is that AirPlay doesn't allow something else to butt in. So basically, if device A is connected to output A, device B can't override it and disconnect it and then shout out over it, or even in tandem with it.
Right.
So there's the protocol doesn't allow for what you're looking to do. The use case makes sense to me. It's just not something that it's certainly not what it's designed for, but it's also not even possible with the way AirPlay works, unfortunately.
Yeah. I just thought, like, man, not obviously not like for kids. I don't think anybody at Apple has kids because they don't ever really seem to design.
They never go home, right?
Yeah, with kids in mind. But yeah. Anyways, that's a whole nother discussion. The question was about Farrago using Audio Hijack. The interface seems like a sort of touch inspired interface. Right. The redesign you did, version 3 when it came
version 3, yep.
Yeah, was redesigned and is beautiful but sort of like feels very touch inspired, I guess. But was that it was always a Mac app? I'm guessing, but was there some inspiration there?
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't want to declaim any other apps or anything like that, but it's not something where we said, hey, let's make a touch-based UI. So Audio Hijack 3 came out in 2015, but it was in progress for about 5 to 7 years before that. Audio Hijack 2 was still in development and still getting updates, but the version 3, which is a pretty dramatic redesign, was in progress for 3 to 5 years before that, and probably a little bit more. So it's I don't want to have to fudge the dates, but the iPad certainly was not prevalent when the initial design of Audio Hijack 3 came about. One thing that we did in Audio Hijack 3 that we were either the first or one of the first Mac apps to do was add popovers. So the iPad added something called a popover, where basically you touch a portion of the UI and a new aspect of it pops up. Instead of loading a new screen, it just pops over the existing UI, and it basically makes those controls more accessible. And in Audio Hijack, if you click a block, we have what's called a popover that shows you the controls for that block, instead of flipping the to the back of the block or something like that. So something that definitely came from iOS, and we sort of translated it to the Mac and found it to be really useful. So that's absolutely something that was inspired by the iPad. But in terms of the total UI and the block-based interface, that was something that I'm sure the touch UI helped us with that, but it was not something where we said, hey, let's make a touch UI, and then you know what, we're not even going to release this on the iPad or anything like that. It definitely, again, so Farrago is the most obvious one. Farrago, you literally have buttons that you click or hit on your keyboard, and so the keyboard translates to the screen. And if you had a touch screen Mac, you would just tap. I'm doing it right into the camera. You would just tap this button, and that would play it the same way on an iPad. So that UI would very obviously translate to the iPad, but it's sort of a result of just how playback interaction works, not that we said, hey, let's make this a touch UI.
Yeah.
But it's definitely been interesting to see, how the iOS interface has evolved over time, and something like popovers, and I'm sure there's other examples that I'm not thinking of that sort of we've brought back to the Mac, or we've looked at and said, okay, that's a good interaction. How can we make that work on the Mac as well? Mm-hmm. It's definitely, anytime you have progress on a platform, even if it's a related platform, it's useful for us to be able to look at that and get ideas from it. Yeah. Not something where we said, this should be a touch UI, and then, let's translate it to the Mac.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's it's interesting now that with Audio Hijack, that's the one sort of user interface frustration where the dragging blocks and having them connect and not connect when you want them to, and things like that. And I know there's some really smart stuff that you guys are doing there to like figure out, because I mean, yeah,
what you want it to do.
Yeah, like that's incredible what you guys are doing with that, and obviously again, just like that, there's going to be use cases where you haven't thought about it, or you're protecting people from doing something that shouldn't happen because you'll end up with whatever, breaking your ears or something. But yeah, that's the one part where it's like I just wanted to like draw a line from this to this and not have it also connect to this other one or whatever. But I know in the interest of like supporting users, keeping things simple but powerful, that's sort of I'm guessing that's the trade-off anyways, because obviously if you could do everything for everybody, you would, obviously, and that's just not the reality.
No, that's you've nailed it exactly. And I think the useful thing to note is that you are what I would call sort of a high-end user of the product, probably doing more complex setups than, I'll throw out a number, 90% of people, 95% of people, maybe 99% of people. You're certainly not the only one who wants to be able to say, connect X to Y to Z, do any auto connect, anything like that. We get that request, but the trade-off is absolutely that a huge percentage of people just need the auto connecting, and we don't want to confuse them just to provide something that you can almost certainly you can still do what you're looking to do. If you toss in, sort of the easiest thing that we suggest is just toss in some extra blocks there to make the chain that you need. Even if you don't even use the blocks, you can turn them off, or it can be a volume block that you leave at 100%. And it's certainly a workaround. It's a hack. It's absolutely not the ideal way to do this, but it's the trade-off of we don't want to confuse 90% of the people who don't need this functionality and who simple and want it to just work for them when they drag on 3 blocks and have it just connect. So it's certainly something where we have a feature case open that says, okay, manual audio routing. How do we do this, and how can we make it work? And somebody like Chris needs this and doesn't want to deal or dicker around with the auto connection, and he wants to be able to just draw it and have it work. But then let's say you draw it and it works. You add one more block. Does it auto connect, or do you need to add that yourself manually? You'd probably want it to auto connect. You'd say, well, that's just one more output. Just add it at the end. But suddenly we're in manual mode, and if we switch to auto mode, then we need to either remember what you did or switch it all to auto. And I think you can understand it's a fairly complex problem where we've taken the easy way out right now and said it does it automatically. If you don't like exactly what it did, you can work around it, but it may not be perfect for every use case, obviously.
Yeah, and that's what I think. I know very little about software programming, but I know enough to affects cascading effect of other stuff going wrong then all of a sudden or whatever.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
So, but I appreciate you taking the time to answer the question. I'm sure you get asked a lot because that's probably from the 5% or whatever it is of users that really want that. I'm sure they're a very vocal 5% at times.
Absolutely. And we respect that. And it's exactly the feedback we want to hear, because if there's something that we're not doing that we can do to make things better, we want to at least know about it and then decide, can we do that in a way that helps everybody or that helps people without hurting anyone else? And so thus far, we've not found a way to do that in a way that would not negatively impact other people. But it's certainly something that we have not forgotten about that or worrying.
Yeah. Yeah, and the final thing I'll ask is just something actually that just happened today that might be of some concern to podcast listeners or podcasters who listen to the show. Is something that's Ecamm Live, or not Ecamm. Ecamm is the software company. They make the live software that I'm using right now, but also they make Skype call recorder, like I mentioned earlier, and they also make call recorder for FaceTime. And they just posted an email to anybody who owns that software that under macOS 10.14. Mojave, they will not be able to continue making that because call recorder for FaceTime will not be compatible with Mojave, which is what they're saying. And so obviously Paul is just, I talked to him about it beforehand, but it's something that you might be thinking as a podcaster who's using Audio Hijack, well, does that mean, because somebody tweeted at me like, are all audio recording apps for Mac going to all of a sudden break now with Mojave? And you mentioned earlier in passing that you're testing software obviously on the beta that's out for 10.14.
Yep.
So I'm assuming you're aware of some of the issues. This is a newer one that seems like something where it's specific to FaceTime audio possibly, and sort of how they're allowing plugins in the past to be loaded into the app, and now they're not on the back end at a deeper level than what I understand anyways. And so, yeah, what is, I guess, in the state of Audio Hijack, or sorry, Rogue Amoeba apps as it relates to 10.14, and does this, it's not a bug, I guess, it's just a new setting or limitation, I guess, of 10.14. Does that seem to, as far as you can tell, is that going to affect anything from Rogue Amoeba that you're aware of?
Right. So the short answer is no. The changes that are affecting call recorder for FaceTime should not affect Audio Hijack or any of our other audio